So, hey, Jonathan, how are you doing?
Doing well. How about yourself, Adam?
Uh, Perfect, because I'm really curious about your background and how OpenRewrite happened. But I think everything started with your first computer. What was it?
Oh, I think I would say it was probably junior or senior year of high school, some sort of Pentium 2 machine,
Oh,
a little later than most. And I was from a really
this is a
rural
boring. I
area.
thought this is like ZX Spectrum C64 on Amiga 500, and this is
Yeah,
Pentium 2.
no, it's pretty late to it. From a rural area and getting that computer was a big moment, I think, for
Mhm.
us. But yeah,
Yeah,
very
okay. So
different.
what you did with the computer? So I mean, you got it. So first, you wanted to have it, or you just got it, and because of
I,
school or whatever.
Yeah, my father got it. I think probably because he was doing tax preparation at the time, so it was just something to do for that. But I had started. I had a friend take a computer science class in high school. There
Hmm.
weren't many folks, really taking that class, so I signed up for it as well. Just a advanced placement computer science course. I showed up to that class. First day, the teacher, Mike Schweikart, just gave us a C++ textbook
Hmm.
and a whole year's worth of assignments and said, let me know if you have any questions. And he went and sat down at his desk.
C++,
And
this is crazy. This is like
yeah,
Mission Impossible.
yeah, exactly. So we just had the C++ book and a list of assignments, and that's how we learned. We were basically self-taught in that classroom. And if we ever got stuck on something, we go ask Schweikart. But otherwise, you're on your own. Figure it out.
Hey,
And I think
this
that's
sounds
representative
like
of
Navy
software
SEALs
engineering.
training, but not computer science.
Exactly. It was great. It was my favorite course. I think you just
Oh, really? Okay.
go at the pace that you can go, and we learned so much that year.
Where
Computer
was it?
science is so
Which
hands
city
on.
was it? Was it in Silicon Valley or where?
Oh no, I was from an area west of St. Louis, Missouri, in the middle of the U.S. So just
Okay, cool.
kind of
Hmm.
in a not so remote but somewhat remote area.
Hmm. Okay, and you learn. I mean, you started with C in and C out, I guess, right? So this was the first Hello World.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, at the
Include
time,
what is
at
it?
the time to get
IO.h, right? IO.h include. I
that's
remember.
right. That's right.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I remember actually, because again, first couple of years was in C++. That's what the advanced placement university courses were taught in. So that's why that was the language of that time. It later moved to Java as the
Mhm.
language
But was it
that
at
was the language.
university or at school? What
It
are you
was
talking about?
in high school, so pre-university,
Yeah,
but you
this is
could take
crazy.
these certain kinds of classes called advanced placement that if you took a test and you passed with a certain score, it would actually give you college credits later on. So, some of
Oh.
us did that for a number of different subjects to get a head start on university. And at that time, that test was in C++, so that's why we learned that. I
Hmm.
remember at some point just picking up it was something I did. I would work on the side, and every once in a while, I would go to the local bookstore. I think
Hmm.
Barnes and Noble bookstore at the time,
Hmm.
and I would just buy another computer science book.
Hmm.
So I would just and kind of randomly, right? Because I didn't really
Hmm.
have a good idea of what I wanted to learn next. So just one language after another. I
Hmm.
remember picking up a book called Java 2. Java 2 was still not quite out yet, and just not grasping the purpose. It
Hmm.
felt to me at the time like just a weaker C++, plus plus, and I just couldn't grasp like the differentiation, like why. Of
Hmm.
course, it was the right once run anywhere thing, so it's a
Were there no bars around Sun Microsystems and Unix?
yeah. I mean, again, from my perspective, there as a high school student, I only interacted with Windows
Okay.
machines. The Visual
Hmm.
Studio was what I was used to writing code in. I didn't understand that world at all.
And because it's still I'm speechless, right? Because you started with C++. Were you interested before? You programmed something before, or was C++ was the head start in at high school? Okay.
No, C++ was it. I literally showed up to that class. He handed us a C++ textbook and a whole set of assignments and said, let me know if you
Okay.
have any questions. And that was
And which assignments you had to do, to complete? So.
it, they were just programs, really. It was just, programs of increasing complexity and that demonstrated use of different data structures and algorithms and so forth. And all of these were meant to prepare us to sit for that exam. That exam would have been, I don't remember the format exactly, but it would have been some multiple choice and some essay form. An essay, in the case of this exam, meant writing code on a piece of paper, with a pencil, and then turning it in at the end.
So how much you understood of C++, operator overloading and templates and inheritance?
Very well.
And destructures?
Very well. And so templating is a good example of something that, from my perspective as a C++ developer, Java lacked generics at the time.
Yeah.
And now I feel like it's an interesting, as Golang kind of started picking up, I just thought, this must be to a Java programmer the feeling of what Java was to me when it was Java 1.1 or, before 1.2. And it just felt like you were taking a step backwards in syntax.
I also started with C++.
Interesting.
And I really liked that. So I liked everything, but I remember the templates were not done yet. So
That's right.
It was or were hard, to configure. And what I also remember, the template was Turing complete language. So it was supposed to be, so the template itself was in C++. It was really complex. And then Java started with JDK 1.0, and what I missed were the header files. I really missed them, because for me it was a clean separation between the header and the implementation. And in Java was dirty. I remember interfaces are nice, but it's not like header files. What I also missed was operator overloading, but templates. I was happy that they were not there, because no one could explain why
it was complicated.
Why they are important. No one could show me a running code, right? So for me, it was template is something like better note, right? And then I didn't like Java for a while, but I started with JDK 1.0, and then with 1.1 I was actually happier. And then because I spent the entire time in actually commercial projects, so it worked. And also there was the constant complaints from C++ programmers around memory management and threading. And we didn't have the problems with Java. So for me was Java, then after a while I really liked Java. So this was a little bit different story, but I still like C++. So I would really like to relearn it again and read a book if find some time. So I would be really interested to do C++ again, because I started with C++. So
I'm sure it's quite different now. I'm sure it's accumulated quite a few features in the last 25 years. But and
there's a thick book from Björn Strustrup, so from Edison Wesley, and I read it and I really liked that. I was fascinated by the complexity, but just as a hobby. So it's not like, but I still, I have the book somewhere, and actually I have several editions. I always, I read the new edition at Christmas for some reason. So this was actually my C++ experience, right? And I did a lot on Linux, actually, never Windows, no Visual Studio. This was the GCC and G++, I remember, and C++ alias on Linux.
I imagine that would be a very different tooling experience. The IDE was so complete, it felt like, for Visual Studio at that time. But of course, that my perspective on that changed over the years. As as I started working in Java, then that's kind of what around the time Eclipse started with its first version. And I remember every major release of Eclipse being so exciting. Because these rule-based refactorings were coming in at a regular clip, and it just felt like every release, which was a fairly regular cadence, just brought more and more and more features. I just was fascinated by the release notes every time.
Back then, I also liked Eclipse. I did a lot of work with Semantic Visual Cafe and JBuilder back then from Poland. And I like IDEs. I just I had all of them, and I just really wanted to switch between them just for fun. Yeah, because even the colors back then were nice. If you had a Visual Studio, there's not Visual Studio Code, there's one not there. A Visual Cafe, what I want to say, it was like I remember yellow and orange, and it was a really nice design. Then was Java Studio Workshop. Yes, Java Studio Workshop was from Sun Microsystems, complete different. There's how it's called. There are multiple windows, which is not one window, but multiple ones.
Mm.
And IntelliJ started back then. So and there was a Code Warrior from MetroWorks was the company. So lots of different IDEs, and Eclipse was the first one which with really good refactoring. This is okay. Forget everything, because in JBuild they have rename, like
Right.
with VI, just search and replace, and Eclipse understood the code really, and I could refactor everything. And I like Eclipse a lot, but after a few years, the plugin hell started, and for me it was mission impossible. I was in so many different projects, and every my client had different, not even plugins. There's like Eclipse distributions, so they had their own Eclipse distribution, which was not compatible with the other one. So for me, I had constantly to switch the workspaces, which was not maintainable for me. And then I did NetBeans, start NetBeans 5 or 6, and I was happy with NetBeans because there was refactoring and no plugins, or there were plugins, but everything came out of the box. So I could install the IDE, and it was done. There was no plugins to manage.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah,
kind of the same benefit we later got from. I felt like there's more bundled in IntelliJ now than you need to get through plugins. So yeah, the more vertically integrated experience makes a lot of sense.
And you kept doing Eclipse?
I did for some years. I think for probably until around 2012 or 13 is when I finally moved to IntelliJ. I think that I remember Eclipse's advantage really was the JDT for so long. Having that custom compiler allowed them to put more semantic information in different places than was available in the Java compiler. And I think as the Java compiler evolved over time, and the IntelliJ was kind of built off of that initially, there's just so much more advantage to it. But
the problem with JDT was not always compatible with the Sun one, right? So we had the trouble. So it's compiled in Eclipse, but sometimes didn't compile on Maven. But back to you. So you studied computer science, I assume?
Yes. Yeah. So curiously, I went to university as a violin performance major because that's, or at least on a scholarship. But I was majoring in computer science and math, so they didn't require those to be the same. But that's how it started.
And so you learned Java before university or during your study?
Well, I had picked it up in high school. Just like I said, I was going to that local bookstore and just picking up books and just reading about a number of languages and picking them up. My university courses were in Ada, believe it or not, to begin with. And, then just a variety of different languages. I don't remember anymore, but my first job out of college, or even actually I had one job in college, were both in Java. So that's kind of where the transition became permanent.
And what was it? Was it like enterprise software or?
It was, yes. I mean, the first job out of college, I was working for a small insurance company, property and casualty insurer. So like a lot of companies of that sort, even to this day, and a lot of their critical business applications were written in Java.
Was it J2E, Java E, or what was it?
It was originally, yeah. So they were a WebSphere, IBM centric shop. So everything was J2E initially. At some point, it moved more towards Spring Framework and then later Spring Boot, but that's how it started.
And so your first two jobs, you said, were Java based. What happened then?
Yeah, so I mean, my job history is a little interesting because while I was still in university, in 2003 I joined the U.S. Army after the invasion of Iraq, and so when I graduated college, I was a commissioned officer. And over the course of the next,
what you did in the Army, was it like?
I ran. I was as an officer leading platoons and later companies of troops running convoy security. So we ran Humvees that provided fire support to convoys going up and down the roads in Iraq and a little bit in Afghanistan over different years. So I spent a lot of time with that.
So you were
it's almost like a mechanized infantry.
How to call it? Yeah, soldier in action or just?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Marines similar.
Yeah, it was the Army and the Marines are a separate component altogether. But yeah, so I led those companies, and so anytime I would return to the U.S., I would temporarily go back to that insurance company writing Java code, and then I would get deployed again, and so this happened for some time, and towards the end of that period, eventually in 2014, roughly, I got out of the army, and around that time, I had gotten a call from or a message from an engineering manager at Netflix, Mike McGarr, who was
Hmm.
working on engineering tools. And I went and interviewed there and moved to California to work for Netflix engineering tools.
Wow, cool.
So it was a
Which
very
was Java,
abrupt
of course, right?
transition.
Everything in Netflix was
That's
Java. I
right.
remember they just wrote a lot of article with the hope that more Java developers would join them, right? So it was
Absolutely.
yeah, everything
A lot
was
of their open
Java.
source, they were just
Yeah,
trying to pull talent from
yeah.
that
Hmm.
ecosystem. I think I at some point I asked Mike how he found me because again I was this programmer at an insurance company in Missouri, and he said, "Well, you contributed something to the Groovy compiler." Um,
Hmm.
I'm not sure if I did or not, but he believes I did. I think I may have been involved in some discussion around updating the grammar at some point, but so
But
it's kind of a
why you
lucky.
were so deep into Groovy? I mean,
Yeah, well, we had moved the that insurance company's build system entirely from Maven to Gradle at one point.
okay,
So, um,
okay.
or sorry, not Maven actually. It was Ant. It was all Ant based, and so we moved from Ant to Gradle.
Hmm.
Yeah, like a lot
But
of folks
I
did.
have to say now, Ant could make more sense again, right? For simple builds, I would say there could be, and there is already something on the horizon. Now, there's not, I
Yeah.
mean, Ant is is with XML, but I don't know whether you know. I had already chat about BLD, like there's a lightweight
Mm,
build tool
mm,
written in Java, so like it is more like build as a
mm,
source. If you or they call it
mm.
infrastructure as code, build as code. So you can in Java itself you can write
I
which
saw
compiles
that.
itself. Yeah, it's really interesting. BLD from the Rive project. You have to
Yeah.
take a look at this. It's really interesting,
Yes. Yeah.
and because Java became so powerful that you don't
Mm-hmm.
need a lot of dependencies. You can just pick Java 21. Maybe you
Mm-hmm.
just need a few dependencies to
Mm-hmm.
like I don't know AWS SDK
Mm-hmm.
or something which you just have to pick, but nothing infrastructural, and you
Mm-hmm.
can actually achieve a lot with Java 21 right now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But you mean you were actually at army in how to call it, like in action, right? Not like an admin.
Mm-hmm.
So you were a proper soldier.
I was. Yeah. Yeah. So again, platoon leader initially. So my first platoon had something like 56 people, I think, in it. Three
Hmm.
squads of gun trucks, and I just rotated between the squads and to be wherever they were because we would send they would be attached to different convoys running different directions at any given moment. So you couldn't be with all of them at the same time, but we just kind of,
Hmm.
myself and the platoon sergeant would just kind of hop between convoys over time.
But you had absolutely no time to study computer science if you were in action, right?
This is going to sound crazy, but there was a lot of downtime
Okay.
and just a lot of boredom. We didn't have good internet connection most of the time. No way to. There was kind of limited ways to call home and things. It was a very different time than
Hmm.
now, and just to keep myself busy would be like if a convoy was about to depart, say, out of one post. We always ran at night, and you may have a time like a scheduled time to leave at 1 or 2 in the morning,
Hmm.
but you stage everything up and are at the gate ready to go at 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. something like
Hmm.
this, and then wait. And
Hmm.
maybe your scheduled time is to depart at 2 a.m., but in fact you don't go till 3,
Hmm.
because some other reasons, spacing and so forth. And so I would sit in the truck with math textbooks, with various things and a little headlamp, and just be writing proofs. That
Hmm.
was kind of how I passed time.
Okay. That's yeah. This is what I understand is a motivation to do something sensible, right? In downtime. Otherwise, it's a waste of time. So and
Yeah.
yeah, similar. Why maybe if I travel or I traveled more before Corona, I was hyper productive, in trains and airplanes because it was downtime anywhere. So I
That's
wanted,
right.
to do something useful.
That's right.
And then I achieved a lot, and I forgot about that in Corona. I think, okay, now I don't travel, so I become hyper productive. But sometimes, the downtime was more productive than, this is because you couldn't do anything else. So, okay, you had to focus what you have on books or whatever. And this was actually a really productive time. So it's maybe similar experience in your case.
I would say we were able to use, I was able to use some of these skills too, even for that purpose. There was a point in one of these years where there was a particular kind of bomb that was really dangerous to us that they would disguise really well in concrete on the road. And so to make it look like a rock, they would just kind of cover it in concrete and just, so you if you're kind of running down the road fairly quickly, it's hard to tell the difference between a regular rock and this disguised bomb. But it had a lot of copper in it because of the complicated reason, but the kind of shape charge had a lot of copper in it. So if you encase it in concrete, of course, that's going to insulate that copper. We always ran at night. And so these things would be very hot still at night relative to a natural rock that didn't have that copper in it. And so if you would look at, a pile with thermal binoculars, you could see this rock, kind of glowing relative to its natural surroundings. And, but it was very risky for us to use thermal binoculars because thermals can't see through glass, right? So you have a choice between kind of peeking up above the turret and exposing yourself to small arms fire, or and using the binoculars, or kind of staying below and not seeing this thing on the side of the road. And so we devised our own mount to like put outside the truck, and you actually mount the binoculars outside the turret, and built our own circuit boards, made our own Cooper chloride out of some hydrochloric acid we found somewhere and some other spare copper, and etched these circuit boards. So you used drew them up in some piece of CAD and like printed with a laser printer, and then used clothes irons to iron the toner onto the board, and used our Cooper, this kind of thing. And then,
MacGyver thing, right?
Yeah, and then scavenged parts off of other things, and we would produce. So we produced our own control board, so you could move it, left and right and up and down, and then wired it to old turret joysticks that we found, in dumpsters in various places, and then fed the video from the binoculars into the truck into PlayStation Portable, which was really popular with troops at the time. So that's what we were using, these little PlayStation.
This is a crazy story.
Yeah. So
some of this crazy story. I mean, this is a great story, right? This could be a movie.
Yeah, some of this engineering stuff kind of got used,
and it worked
too. Yeah. That's for a little while we did that.
But this is, I mean, how you knew that it would work? I mean, this alone, that to find the resources, or the not only the resources, the knowledge, because you have to know that it's compatible. If you have only spare parts,
right?
How you knew that it would work? So this is a really curious story. What?
Yeah, we could. I mean, pretty quickly we tried the binoculars. You could just see the outputs, video outputs on that, and inputs on a PlayStation. That part was the simple part. I think the trying to, drive a motor to move it, or a set of motors to move it one way or the other, that's kind of completely independent of the way the binoculars work. It could have been anything that you bolted on top.
So there was standard video output, so this was not that hard. I thought, you somehow you had to pick up the signal and convert it to
no.
Okay, this
so no software there. It was just a direct hard link between the two.
Okay.
But so there were a lot of things like that. There were a lot of things where, and that's just one example, probably the more extravagant example, but there was a lot of this, piecing things together to make it work on the spot.
Was it normal
natural
in the war to do such things, or just as you had to invent lots of stuff?
Yeah, I think the situation on the ground changes so quickly. The procurement system doesn't keep up with tactical changes on the ground. So I think this has been true of soldiers all throughout history, is just kind of inventing solutions on the spot as needed.
Okay.
To make things up.
Okay, so then you came back. You had you were forced to work with Ant, and this was a similar story. So I don't like Ant, so I will pick Groovy with Gradle. and then you
Yeah.
contributed almost to code, or at least you participate in discussion.
Yeah.
And this is how you got the offer from Netflix, which is
That's right. Yeah.
perfect, right?
Yeah. I don't remember whether I added code or not, but yeah, the something related to the Groovy compiler. And so at any rate, wound up going to Netflix Engineering Tools. And, that was an interesting company at that time. There's a lot written about them, no rules. They were kind of famous for this freedom and responsibility culture. And
1 million challenge, right? There was that time
there was
where they had $1 million
dollars
for the best algorithm to find
That's right.
the videos. This was
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, I remember that being solved internally. I don't think. Well, so that was about finding the best recommendations, right? If I remember.
Yeah, exactly. Recommendation
Yeah,
engine. It was the algorithm for the recommendation engine. Exactly.
Yeah. I don't know if they used. I think somebody won that challenge. I'm not sure if they ever actually put that in.
I think there was a
in production
professor with some students. So I read about that. So
yeah.
And how was the culture at Netflix? Was it interesting?
It was quite good. It was as written, which is always surprising. There's a lot of times cultures are aspirational. That people say what they want to be, but that maybe they are, maybe they aren't. I feel like Netflix's culture was emergent. The original Netflix culture deck described how it is, not so much what they want it to be. And so a lot of things written in that initial culture deck about freedom and responsibility and so forth were very true, which had a direct impact on my work on engineering tools, because I was working on build systems, so Gradle plugins, we were actually trying to move Ant to Gradle internally there as well when I arrived, well. And just a lot of things around the build. I think in a more conventional company, there are things where, if we're trying to migrate, say from at the time Java 6 to 7, we would just say, hey, company-wide initiative and such a date, you need to be on Java 7, top-down sort of thing. And that was very anti-cultural there. You couldn't impose constraints on what product engineers did. So there couldn't be a day in which you just break their build because they aren't complying with some goal. Rather, you have to find ways to get them to move. And I think for our part, we spent quite a bit of time working on reporting tools and dashboards and training sessions and things of this sort to try to surface people information about where they were versus where we wanted them to be. And it just resulted in practically no action on the part of product engineers. And so you go around asking people, what could I do? Like, how could I surface this better for you? And I often got the same sarcastic response, which is, do it for me. Otherwise, I got something else to do. Right. But there's only 2 or 3 of us on engineering tools or build tools specifically at that time. So, it doesn't scale, obviously, us doing it for them. So that's what really precipitated this whole work originally on Gradle went, and then what eventually became OpenRewrite as we expanded the scope of it later on.
Oh, okay. Interesting. By the way, at Netflix back then, there was one famous guy from the Java Posse podcast. He also worked on the Groovy tools. I forgot his name.
Yeah.
He was involved in Grails and Groovy, and there was the Java Posse podcast, and there was one guy, he worked on Netflix and also had no story. And also in similar area to yours, maybe you work with him, because he was responsible for, I remember, Gradle and Groovy and later AWS, also, the migration.
Yeah, so I think this was Carl Quinn.
Yeah, exactly.
And Carl, it was the same team. Diane Marsh took over the team from Carl Quinn when he left. He went down to Riot Games, I think, shortly before I got there. So I never worked with him directly, although we did continue to see him quite a bit at different events over the years. But yeah, same team.
Okay, so when was it? And Java 6 and 7, so it was around 2009?
Well, amazingly, so I went to Netflix in 2014. 6 was already pretty old at that point.
Yeah.
But we had not successfully made the move to 7. And so I think somewhere, and this was even maybe 2015, that we were trying to move to Java 7. At that time, somewhere around those years, I don't remember exactly which year, Oracle changed the licensing on Java, the JDK itself, and we had to move to Java 8. And I don't remember the circumstances behind that, but so what first started as a Java 6 to 7 migration very quickly became a let's go all the way to 8 because the
Mhm.
licensing is changing, and it would be an exceeding operating expense if we
Mhm.
were to bear that licensing cost.
Because moving from Java 6 and to 7 somehow interesting, but from Java 6 to 8 is a huge benefit, right? With Java streams and
Absolutely.
yeah, this is was
Absolutely.
yeah, I would say you almost have to do it, right? Java
Right.
7 there were some minor things, but nothing revolutionary. But Java 8 is the thing to be, I would say.
The problems as usual centered around the ASM binaries, either directly or transitively. Those are the places where you wind up tripping up um, bytecode manipulation libraries that need to be at a certain level, and transitive dependency conflict and so forth.
Mhm.
And so
Just
that's
took a look. The Java release date of Java 6 was 2006. This is why Java 7 is 2011. Interesting
yeah,
thing.
yeah. So we were 4 or 5
And
years behind
Java
that
8 is
release.
2014.
Yeah, yeah.
So a long time ago, 10 years of Java
It
8.
is. It is.
So so you did something. So you implemented like automatic migration tool for Netflix,
I did.
and this
Yeah,
became the beginning of OpenRewrite, right?
it was. It was. Yeah, because I think hearing that point enough, I don't have time. Do it for me.
Mhm.
You start to think. If you hear that enough, you think, well, that kind of implies some automation of some sort is
Mhm.
needed.
Okay, and so you started a thing at Netflix. So this was okay.
I did, yeah. So it started and Netflix was, very open about open sourcing. So OpenRewrite started there as a Netflix Skunkworks project, Apache license from the beginning. It was not our core business. We just wanted to move forward on things. And some of the initial use cases were we had an internal logging library called Blitz4j that we wanted to replace with SLF4j. It was just hard enough of a problem to elude regular expression replacement because logging statements can exist over multiple lines. You have string concatenation or not. So it just really was difficult to do with a regex replacement. But it seemed like I'm trying to change one method invocation, like I have one type of a logger. I'm trying to reverse or change the order of arguments and change the string literal way that we specify parameters. And so we started with that problem in mind, and it kind of grew from there.
So
I
you
looked
had to
around.
understand the source code as AST, right? So I mean,
That's
there's no
right.
other way. Hmm.
That's right. And so interestingly, because I started, I think, on that one problem where we're looking at, think about loggers. So you have logger.info, logger.debug, logger.warn. These are very generic words. And how am I to determine from just looking
Hmm.
at a method called info, whether that info represents a blitz4j logger or whether it represents a log4j2 logger or slf4j logger? The variable name would probably be
Hmm.
called logger at any rate.
Hmm.
So it was clear from the very beginning, even with that simple problem, that we couldn't just use AST manipulation in the traditional sense, but rather we needed all the type attribution information as well. Like I
Hmm.
needed to be able to know which receiver that
Hmm.
method invocation on info was being called on.
So how you built? So how you started? So what was
So
the? I
that's
mean, mhm.
given that assumption. So that type attribution assumption, and there was one other assumption that was very important, which was that if we're going to do source to AST change, and then back to source,
Mhm.
it was very important that we didn't clobber the formatting of the original code.
Mhm.
And because of the freedom and responsibility culture, there was no formatting algorithm we could assume that would result in the same code. So unlike Google, very top down, Google Java format, everything looks exactly the same. Netflix, because of freedom and responsibility, was all over the place.
Mhm.
Tabs versus spaces, different blank line formats, different import orderings, wildcard imports or not wildcard imports. There are a lot of different stylistic realities to this code.
Mhm.
So if you just want to change the logging statement log.info, I don't want to clobber the rest of the file in order to do
Mhm.
that. And so with those two assumptions, kind of armed with those two assumptions, I went looking, what can I use? I looked at Java
Mhm.
parser. I looked at, Google Refaster, which couldn't, unfortunately, it could only modify things inside of a method block. just like looking around at other technologies, trying to find a fit,
Mhm.
and unfortunately just couldn't find something that had those two characteristics.
Interesting. What I don't know whether you are aware of NetBeans tool called Jackpot. This is what James Gosling did back then. This is very old one, very old one.
Mm,
But
mm,
this is where I heard the idea first that
mm,
they were able, or were able. NetBeans already understands ASTs, and you could have refactorings on the ASTs. And I thought back then this is actually a genius idea, because if you refactor on AST, it should always work. I mean, because semantics are kept as not like messing with text is more like um, working with the semantic representation, and then you
right.
can just flush it down to text again. So I found the idea genius, but it is a long time ago. I think the jackpot was 2008 or even earlier, something like this.
Mm,
So if you search
mm,
for it, if you're interested, search for NetBeans and jackpot, and you will find some old resources, really, really old.
yeah.
And then the
Yeah.
refactorings in IntelliJ were also somehow similar later. I found there was all like yeah.
Yeah. So IntelliJs are based on the PSI, and that's,
Mhm.
and, which is their internal AST. Um, I don't remember anymore, honestly, the circumstances here. I think there were something about the way that the PSI was created was very heavyweight. I think there's certainly different assumptions. Like if you're in an IDE, like IDE has to deal with potentially incomplete code.
Mhm.
So which is a whole nother set of problems,
Mhm.
that I don't envy them for. Um, I think in this case we were operating under the assumption that the code that we started with was fully functional,
But you
and
don't.
making a change from there.
Okay, but you did had to understand all the dependencies, or was it enough that the source code was syntactically correct
No, it needed to understand the dependencies. Yeah.
as well?
So yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Yeah.
So it has
So
to be compilable, right?
it has to be compilable. Yeah,
But
that's the default assumption of OpenRewrite
okay,
even to this day.
but actually, not everything is just what you touch, right? So I mean, this like, or what, you know what I mean? So if I have one class, I pick one class with blitz for j and will replace with log for j. So for you matters just the class, not the entire project has to be compilable. Or if there was one compiler error, you stopped working. So it depends where you
It
were plugged in. You're plugged into the build tool. It's a different story. Or you just parsed the sources at your own. So this is
Yeah,
the question.
it can certainly, the parser can continue in can be configured to continue in the presence of a certain failure. But I
Mhm.
think for the rule to be accurate, the whole code should be compilable, because
Okay.
there's going to be
Mhm.
scenarios where that particular code that isn't compiling right now defines a method which is used somewhere else, which is, so it can have potentially cascading effects when
Mhm.
that's the case. At any rate, and I always think, when we start a project, it is very possible that there was a better starting point, whether that had been Jackpot at the time. I had never heard that, actually, even to this podcast. I knew James Gosling had done something much earlier, but
Mhm.
nobody had ever had a name for it. I knew about PSI, of course. I knew about JDT, of course, because I'd worked on Eclipse plugins. For one reason or another, each of those were kind of didn't fit what I thought I needed. I definitely did not want to start the problem from parsing Java code from source.
Yeah. This would
Um,
be my next question, right? So
right.
what you did. Uh-huh.
And I feel like that's what Java Parser has spent a lot of time on, is just trying to compile Java code from source, and over time gradually adding, different, type solvers and things of that
Mhm.
sort. So after all, the Java compiler is written in Java. I just use the Java compiler itself.
That's
That's
cool. Mhm.
programmatically instantiable. The Java compiler has all the type attribution information and solving built into it. And so I wanted to start from that. And, at the point when the Java compiler builds its AST and type attributes it, it has lost a lot of information around the white spacing and styles and comments and so forth, because of course, it doesn't
Mhm.
need it. That's
Mhm.
not significant to producing bytecode, which is its end goal. So we kind of go through this mapping exercise of mapping the internal Java compiler AST elements to OpenRewrite model objects, which have kind of
Almost like
data and fields.
source maps in JavaScript, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so it's in some ways it is kind of a source map back to the text, but in structural form, and with ways of kind of like containers around spaces that can exist, but allowing the programmer to kind of bypass those containers to more directly access the data model and so forth. So it really is like a AST with type attribution plus formatting designed solely for the purpose of modification and impact.
Still interesting. And the name rewrite was already existing back then, or was it? What was the name back then?
It was also called Rewrite then, yeah. So I think there was even to this day, there's a Netflix Skunkworks project called Rewrite. So it was worked on there for some time, maybe a year. I left Netflix for personal reasons back then, moved back to Missouri, and so it kind of went to the back burner. So I went to work from Netflix. I went to the Spring team. Founded the Micrometer project for metrics instrumentation. So it was kind of doing something unrelated in many ways. Micrometer to me was a step towards continuous delivery automation, which was something that I wanted to bring to Pivotal's kind of like, cloud platform by pulling Spinnaker, the continuous delivery effort from Netflix and Google and others, forward into its cloud platform. But Spinnaker, to be at its best, really needs metrics to do things like automated canary analysis and so forth. And Spring was really lacking dimensional metrics as a capability, and of course other Java frameworks were as well at that time. So nothing, Netflix had a tool called Spectator, which it used to do dimensional metrics instrumentation internally. It was primarily designed to send metrics to Netflix's open source Atlas, but there were ways of extending it for other metrics instrumentation systems. I had a long talk with Brian Harrington there at Netflix about whether we should expand upon Spectator to support Datadog and whatever other metrics instrumentation system, Prometheus, that people wanted to use. And I think there just wasn't a lot of appetite from Netflix to bear the cost of those expansions when they didn't directly fit their needs internally. So that's kind of why Micrometer started the way it did, and heavily influenced by Spectator initially.
Oh, it's interesting on multiple levels, because I also I worked more with the Prometheus metrics, so open metrics, and the microprofile metrics and the micrometer come a little bit later. But some questions. So you were the main OpenRewrite contributor from the beginning, or was it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. So you okay. And were you able to transform some projects at Netflix, or was not done yet?
They were, yeah. So it was really that Blitz4j, Log4j migration was one of them. We did some limited security vulnerability repair as well by feeding data from internal vulnerability management databases and doing that kind of thing.
I'm not sure whether Netflix is happy right now, to migration from Blitz4j to Log4j too, right? With the Log4Shell security.
Right.
Maybe they had, to fire up your tool again to migrate it back.
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure.
So it worked. So how many projects were migrated? So roughly,
several? I can't say now. It was probably thousands of projects took that change in one form or another. I would ask you
more than 3, but 1,000 is crazy.
Yeah, and it was interesting because it's not that we did a lot of individual migration projects during my remaining time there, but you start with the level of idealism, like, we'll just issue mass PR requests or pull requests, and again, because of freedom and responsibility and different specialties, there were whole teams there that weren't even familiar with what a pull request was, or didn't have any default reviewer sets, so they just wouldn't notice it. So there's a lot of getting a change even if you can prepare a change automatically, getting it through is definitely a social engineering problem. Some people just don't like the concept of getting a pull request from a central team. I think there's like an internal resistance. Programmers, like, we don't like being told what to do. And on some level, a pull request coming from outside of our team feels like somebody trying to tell me what to do. And there's just a natural resistance to it. So, it was, if we could surface to them in a way where they were able to, at a moment of their choosing, go and like execute the automation on their own, effectively make it pull based as opposed to push based, that helped people act a little more on projects. And then we were able to track, I think, who hadn't completed it. And as you got to that really low percentage long tail, at that point, you just start dealing with teams individually, kind of reach out to them. I'm going to come to your desk right now. We're going to do this together. I'm going to teach you how to do this. And I always tell this story. I think it's funny that when we got to that kind of last couple percent, and I would reach out to somebody and say, I'm coming to your desk right now. I go to their desk and they would be using a trackball mouse. And so I started to like develop this sense in my mind of like, there's this weird correlation between people that use a trackball and people that refuse to accept automated change. And so when I would start going to desk, I would carry a mouse around with me, a normal mouse, and I'd show up at some stranger's desk carrying a mouse, and they'd look at me, look at the mouse, look at me, look at the mouse, and start immediately arguing for the ergonomics of the trackball mouse. And I'm like, hey, I just want to get this merged, right? Let's talk about that another time.
But by the way, a pull request might be problematic in enterprise context.
Definitely.
So I also spent some time now with Java and larger enterprise companies. And if I get pull request from another department, the problem is it is not always this what you can actually do, because if you are working for a department, you have rules and ideas how it should be. And if you get a pull request from outside, sometimes it is more work to adjust it as what is actually what is the convention at the company.
That's right.
And if you reject it, it's even worse, because then you have to argue in meetings why you rejected this. This is problematic.
Right.
If the project is an public project, it's way easier, because I can accept it or I can argue more openly. In big enterprises, pull requests could be actually really problematic, right?
I agree. I almost am at the point now where I think mass pull request issuance is almost the last thing I reach for. And only in the like log4shell situations where we need to get this done, but I think most change is done better by like enabling a team to pull it at a time and place of their choosing, and then just having good visibility on who has and hasn't done the work yet. Yeah,
exactly. So now okay, you stopped working at Netflix, and then you started at Pivotal, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And was Micrometer new, or was it your invention?
I would say invention only in the sense that I created the project, but I think it was heavily influenced by Netflix's Spectator.
Yeah, that's crazy. We have to argue about Micrometer.
So it was initially like Spectator plus Prometheus client, right? Was the
Yeah. Oh, this is even more interesting, because because we have no time for Micrometer today, but what
we could always do another one on that, because that is a deep topic,
exactly,
for sure.
Because I don't like Micrometer because I'm application developer, and I don't care what Datadog and the others are, and whether they need different format, whatever, right? I would like to expose my business metric and I'm done, right? And with Micrometer, I have to configure it to just output basic metrics. And this is for application developer is too powerful. It's a similar story like Eclipse and plugins, right? So I don't care about the plugins. I would like to have a single download and just go. Right. So for me, just just exposure of simple counter, just counter how often something happens, or gauge would solve 80% of my business needs. Right. Because all the low level stuff is more interesting for the platform. But less interesting, for the business development. By the way, similar story to Hystrix. What I remember, the Hystrix from Netflix, the fault tolerance framework,
Yeah.
In Germany, it was hugely popular. Everyone wanted to do
Hmm.
this, but there were
Hmm.
not that many cases in business applications where you could actually apply all the
For
patterns,
sure.
you know. So
Agreed.
and there
Yeah.
was
It's
completely
different when you're a
overused,
streaming
and
video
everyone was
company.
crazy about historics.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
say, okay, what are you talking about? For my business application, maybe I need to know timeout. Is in my
Right.
with timeout, I'm already happy.
I think
And
with
this was
micrometer, you
mainly
kind of get
overused.
both, right? I
Yeah.
like you can just use a counter or timer if you wish. The and do nothing else. I think the other kind of binders were intended for frameworks to pre-configure for you,
Yeah.
and that's what they do. I mean, by and large. So you get a good default set of things out of the box. It's not your concern as an application developer; they're just going to be there, and then you add business metrics as needed around the edges.
Yeah.
Um,
But I use Quarkus, not Spring,
and
and
Quarkus
if
also
I had
binds a lot of that stuff by default,
Yeah, yeah. But
and
with micro profile metrics, there was nothing to do. I had one annotation, and with
mhm.
micrometer, I had at least adjust which registry I would like to expose. Okay, I don't care. So there was like a few lines of code,
Yeah,
but back then there was no lines of code. I just said it
yeah,
counted, and I was done. But
and I don't see that
this
as a
is fault of
deficiency really.
Quarkus,
Of
not
I
of
don't.
micrometer.
Yeah, exactly, and I mean ultimately, if you're going to publish metrics to Datadog, you need to provide some sort of API key or something like that. So there can't be
Mhm.
no configuration, but
Yeah,
of
exactly.
course you could
Mhm.
bind that to environmental things, and that does happen a lot of things. But
We have to talk about next time because
yeah,
this
yeah,
is a
absolutely,
broader
it
topic.
is an
Because
interesting
if
topic in its own right. Yeah,
we
yeah,
have we have to
yeah, yeah.
but now we have more interesting topic because about open rewrite or rewrite.
Right,
So you started micrometer
right.
and forgot about rewrite, or what was the relation between micrometer and rewrite?
There really wasn't any relation other than that. Yeah, I mean, I think I would say there was no relation initially.
Hmm.
I we a couple observations. I mean, Micrometer was a predecessor to Spinnaker. That was really the end goal. That was the continuous delivery automation thing. I just felt like metrics instrumentation was a necessary component of that,
Yes.
and it was very much lacking in Spring at the time. And again, I was working in the Spring team, so for what it's worth, and so we did get onto Spinnaker at some point. So Micrometer, went to 1.0 and we went to Spinnaker. And when working on Spinnaker, we started working with large enterprises. So my co-founder, Olga Kunzich, and I started working with JP Morgan. We're working with others on Spinnaker, and trying to kind of get that into their environment or enable them on continuous delivery automation. And one of the things we kept hearing over and over again was, I'd love to do automated canary analysis, but talk to me in a year when I'm done moving Java 7 to 8, or Spring Boot this to that, or Quarkus this to that, or JE this to that. And they would always seem really kind of depressed about that. Like, like this kind of awful thing I have to do. And not surprisingly, the concerns were pretty similar, like independent of the company, because after all, we
Hmm.
basically build applications on the same or a similar set of open source libraries and third party
Hmm.
components. So there's a lot of repeatability to the problem from one place to another. I think we heard that story so many times that we decided to go focus our efforts back on
Hmm.
this.
So you rebooted this rewrite idea, right? And you quit Pivotal and started your own company. This is the
Right.
story. Hmm.
Yeah,
When was it?
there's one step in the middle there, which is
Okay.
I had Hans Dockter, Gradle had always been interested in the refactoring thing since he saw it
Wow.
back in
Okay. Is
2016,
that
2017.
the creator of Gradle, Hans Dockter?
Right, right, right. So he had seen it originally back in 2016 and 17. Uh, I kind of pitched it first publicly at Gradle Summit way back then. And he was always kind of interested in the concept. And so I joined Gradle briefly to do this this refactoring thing as part of Gradle's product portfolio,
Hmm.
and working directly for Hans. And um, at some point, I hope he doesn't mind me saying publicly. At some point, there was a Friday when I had a meeting on the calendar with Hans, and Hans said, we're letting you go today. You should go do this on your own. Right. So put a deck together and let me know, and I'll introduce the first investor. I'm not sure. I think this may have been kind of a plan of his from earlier. In effect, Hans helped, give me the final push needed to go do this, and actually introduced the person that would later lead the first seed round in Moderne, the company that came out of that.
Mm-hmm. Just perfect outcome for you, right?
Yeah, and still owe a lot to him for that push.
And why the name Moderne? It's a German name almost.
It's so. First of all, I like that you say that. One of the first businesses we worked with is French speaking, and they believe it was named for them. And we work with Latin America sometimes, and they believe it's named for them. And so there is a certain
this is this is great.
There is a certain it's nicer for non-English speakers sometimes. Sometimes words we choose are very difficult outside of English, but it's in specific. Moderne is an Art Deco movement. It's a very a specific Art Deco movement from the 20s or 30s. Which was the sort of predominant architectural style of the small town that I came from.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, a lot of stained glass and brick, I would say, at the time. And of course, there's a nod to modernity, right? Modernization, that kind of thing. So, yeah.
I first saw it. I thought this is the Moderne with the A.
Vaccine, yeah.
It's like they're crazy that they are, they are doing Java refactoring. This is actually interesting, right? So
I know. And again, maybe this again shows my ignorance. I had never even heard of that company when we formed this one. It was 2020 that we formed this company, so it was not so many months later that Moderna, the vaccine, became a very public name, and we thought, oh well, I think soon enough we will not want to recall that time anyway. So,
we'll just as a cliffhanger for next time. So, what I already know. So, what OpenRewrite is and how it's useful. It's a Maven and Gradle plugin. And with lots of, I would say, repository full of refactorings and stylings, formattings, replacements based on the visitor pattern, and you can write your own refactoring. So this is what I can tell the listeners.
That's right.
And it is maybe you remember, back then we had the Jalopy, the Java formatter, and we had then what were all the formatter tools? There were lots of Maven plugins with just for formatting. Jalopy was, I think, the first one. Right. The next one was, you remember? I forgot actually. There was and you could actually use OpenRewrite for all of that. So there's a single Maven plugin, and we can configure as a style or recipe, right? Style is more like formatting, and recipe is the code changes. And it does the work, and you say how rewrite run and rewrite explain, right? And is, I would say, seamless Maven integration. And the question is now what we can buy from your company, because it works well as an open source tool. So what is the added value of Moderne?
Yeah, so we take those same recipes and that LST format, so that's AST, enriched AST. When you run it in the Maven plugin, you'll notice that sometimes the Maven plugin takes a while to run because we have to produce that whole LST. We have to produce it in memory. The modifications made in memory. The result is serialized back to disk, and then on to the next thing. So the time is dominated by that parsing time. Moderne takes that LST and is able to serialize it to disk, and then we'll do that for an entire enterprise's code base, hundreds of millions of lines of code. So then we can run those recipes, on thousands of projects at a time and mass commit them or extrapolate impact analyses from those. Especially helpful when you're developing new recipes, because you're able to exercise it on the entire organization's code base and see where you may have missed things before shipping it out.
What you could do, just as spontaneous idea, you already working on it, I guess. What you could do, of course, if you are in enterprise and it is a closed system and you have, the data on your disk, you can analyze the data a bit better, right? So you could even work more closely with stuff like Copilot and stuff like that, right? Or with LLMs and have complete different optimization strategies.
We'll talk all about that next time in the relationship with LLMs. I think there's some interesting things we've got coming out here that we should talk more about. But I think you're right to kind of think that just like, retrieval augmented generation, you're using documents to to make an LLM smarter. I think so it is here that we're using that LST to make them.
And this is almost like, the enterprise tier is almost like the caches or database, right? Databases, if they had, the commercial offerings, there was like off-heap storage almost, right? So this is okay. I can store the data and on disk to make it more scalable, which is fair. I mean, if you're an open source project, you can just run, OpenRewrite, which is nicely documented. So already documentation is really well done. So it is it's absolutely usable, and it's interesting business strategy, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have to buy subscription with you because we have to talk about Spinnaker, Micrometer, OpenRewrite, Moderne. So this was not
a lot of things.
It's not a good idea to ping me, So now you have no time for your company. You will join, as a recurring AXFM guest, and we will cover some Java stories.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Perfect. Where people can find you, what is, the URL of your company and OpenRewrite and stuff like that?
Yeah. So from the company, it's Moderne, moderne.io. That will also link you to OpenRewrite. But on GitHub, there's the OpenRewrite organization, which has a number of repositories inside of it that provide different refactorings. And the docs are at docs.openrewrite.org. So those are good places to start.
So thank you a lot. It was really a pleasure and really interesting story.
Yep. Thank you, Adam. Talk soon.